Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into Venom, and with this one we get a lot of the questions answered as far as the intentions of Meridius, as well as his plans for crafting the evolution of the Venom symbiote, which makes for some pretty interesting conversations. So with that said, let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch your spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping back in right after the reveal of Meridius more or less having Carlton Drake like a puppet on a string, and not so much in the sense of any kind of mind control tactic, but Carlton Drake literally owes Meridius his life, and it's for that reason that Carlton Drake is just agreeing to everything that Meridius is saying. And I mean, it could also be the thing to where Drake believes that the same way that Meridius giveth, Meridius could taketh away. But for the time being, the vibe that we're getting from Carlton Drake, it's really more so a thing of appreciation and adoration. But even still, Meridius makes it very clear that Carlton Drake really isn't doing him any favors. And as we've seen, just before he departs, he leaves Bedlam in the present, and he does so by forming Bedlam from a portion of himself that he left behind. And with Meridius doing this and leaving from here to go back to his garden, and it's like from here where we get to see how crazy his capabilities are, as he describes this whole thing as a game to where he's not restricted by linear moves, with him being able to slip through time and make changes across the board. And on top of that, he's had thousands of years to become who he is and perfect his skills. And as he makes his way to the garden, which is his creation like we had seen, and also what he would describe as the furthest end of all that is. But with him returning back here, he also expresses that within this game that's being played, that he's playing against a novice, and that novice being Eddie Brock. And once again with Meridius, he's bringing thousands of years of preparation to the table to play out his moves on Eddie and the son that he left behind. But with that being said, like, here's the thing, because for Meridius, who had just left Carlton Drake, for him it's here when he gets back to the garden in this moment where Eddie Brock first arrives. Because before, when we were left with that cliffhanger from issue 1, it was really more of a view from Eddie's perspective, with one event leading to the next in a linear fashion, which is really the only way that Eddie would understand it at the time. But now we're seeing it from the other end, for this moment and for a few others, with us now getting the perspective of Meridius, who may have seemed very inviting when we first saw Eddie arrive at the garden, which is how it seemed from Meridius's words, which are the exact same here because it's the same moment. But instead now, as we actually see what Meridius was thinking in that moment, and it's like the thoughts behind his words aren't too friendly. Because when Eddie washes up through time and lands in the garden and reconstitutes himself from the available matter, Meridius is really just watching him like, look at this guy, look at him struggling. And these are just additional thoughts on top of what he was thinking just moments ago, as far as how unprepared Eddie is for this game that he's more or less just stepped into. While Meridius, on the other hand, he's prepared for and began to play this game thousands of years ahead of Eddie, which in a way, if I must say, it makes Meridius a bit cocky, which may come back to hit him in the long run. But then again, what is the long run when we're talking about time travel? But also as we follow them, we begin to see the continuation of Eddie's initial arrival at the garden. And for Eddie, when he first gets there, of course, he's skeptical. But Meridius freely gives out information because, again, he believes that he's so far ahead of Eddie that regardless of what Eddie knows, it's not really gonna matter. Or if anything, it'll only play into the game within the means of what Meridius has already seen. But it's here with Meridius taking Eddie through the garden, which is entirely made of symbiote matter, and he tells Eddie that this is what becomes of the symbiote hive, to where at this point all the symbiotes at the end of time, they lay dormant in the dream state, and Meridius has more or less just recrafted their physical forms into that of the garden. But for Meridius to be even able to do something like this, it of course raises suspicion for Eddie, because for one, he's curious if the other symbiotes in this hive are okay with him doing this, but then also with Meridius being this capable, and secondly, it has Eddie wondering if Meridius is actually Knull. And after being asked directly, he tells Eddie no, but then he also lets Eddie know that he is a king in black, and not just him but also everyone else here. And it's here where he introduces Eddie to the others, to where we have Wild in the blue, who's a king from soon after Eddie's time, and next to him Tiro in the green, who Meridius would describe as more well behaved, and also a king that had came along sometime later. But even with Meridius telling Eddie that everybody's a king here and everybody's great, yada yada yada, you can kind of tell when we get this moment when Meridius kind of puts Tiro in his place, for attempting to speak for him, and you can tell that this moment kind of shows Eddie like, okay, well, this dude's definitely the dude in charge. And not just that, but it also sparks the idea that maybe this Meridius guy isn't as nice as he seems. And it's here where Meridius expresses that we're all kings, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're all friends. Because he says that he does try to teach these other guys to navigate through time, but really only so they'll leave him alone. But then this conversation gets interrupted when another symbiote runs up on Eddie, begging for a moment of his time to tell him something, but then that symbiote is snatched up by Bedlam. And with Eddie seeing that no one's helping this guy, he jumps in. And when this happens, like Meridius, he doesn't do anything. He's just watching like all of this is beneath him. But also with Meridius watching this, he mentions that this doesn't really matter because all of them here, all these different kings in black, in a practical sense, they're really just minds without bodies, who are in a garden of bodies without minds. So only so much can be done here. But nonetheless, he also lets it continue because he figures, if anything, this will be beneficial to Bedlam so that he could at least work out some tension. But the crazy thing is, with Eddie helping this other symbiote out, Eddie then starts to get wrecked by Bedlam, and while that's happening, the other symbiote is like, yeah, kill him, which right there right away throws Eddie for another loop because he jumped in to help this guy. And for him to lay there from the sidelines and root against Eddie, it's a bit more confusing than it is insulting. But as a result, Bedlam drops Eddie, picks up the other dude, and just jumps away. And from here, Meridius prepares to leave again, leaving Tiro to show Eddie the rest of the garden. But before Meridius leaves, Tiro tries to tell him something, leading with the words, "I meant to say to you something I forgot." And Meridius just cuts him off right there. And he's like, you know what I forgot? Your mama. No, I'm playing, he ain't say that. But Meridius quickly cuts off Tiro, and he dismisses what Tiro's about to tell him, which again, from what we've seen, this looks to be the greatest weakness of Meridius, which is his arrogance, because for all we know, Tiro could have told Meridius something that would have turned the tables, and it's likely that from here, that whatever that information was, that Tiro will tell it to Eddie, while Meridius is gone and Eddie and Tiro are doing the garden tour. But when Meridius leaves, Eddie sees this whole thing, and again, he's shown that this Meridius guy is a jerk. And as Meridius travels to the past, he can't help but think to himself about how he sees the others that he had left in the garden as children. Because with Wild, he's always leaving sly/bitter remarks. Eddie he sees as the biggest child, but he doesn't really say why. And Tiro he sees as a bootlicker, and for whatever reason, Tiro, with doing that, it irks Meridius the most. And for a minute, he does think to himself like, okay, well, maybe I should have listened to Tiro and just heard what he had to say. But that thought just glosses over the mind of Meridius, because again, Tiro strikes a nerve with Meridius because he feels like Tiro is always cowering behind him, almost like a sad puppy, which triggers Meridius more than anything, which could possibly do with the origin of Meridius, but I'll talk about that more towards the end of the video. And because Meridius has to go back in time and handle sensitive events with temperament, he makes sure that his first stop is a place that he can go to and let out his frustrations. And that's exactly what he does when we see him head back here in that same moment from issue 1 when he had taken over the symbiote Ringo and just slaughtered that whole crew with the intention of waiting for George to see this and then go call for Eddie. But again, this time around, from the perspective of Meridius, we now see why this message was delivered so violently. And then from there, we see Meridius head over to the home of Eddie and Dylan on the night just moments before Eddie's death, disguised as Eddie, and doing this with the intention of getting Dylan to leave the home and make his way to the motel just in time to see the real Eddie die. And keep in mind, with us seeing this, we know that the attack on the motel had been set up by Carlton Drake, who was not only working for Meridius, but also in his partnership with Senator Crane. He made sure that the media caught footage of the Venom symbiote going crazy minutes before the senator's speech. So at this point, Meridius has already got Eddie's death planned out, but like he had mentioned before, he needs Dylan to see Eddie die, because for Dylan, watching his father's death is the trigger that needs to be established. But like we had seen this night play out to where the real Eddie called and Dylan snuck out, and when this happened, Meridius, he really didn't care, because he overheard the real Eddie on the phone with Dylan, which let him know that his tactics to make Eddie panic, they worked, but also this had ended up sending Dylan to the motel anyway. So for Meridius, even with this plan not working out exactly as intended, it still works out in his favor, because it sends Dylan exactly where Meridius wanted him to go. But also as a result of this, in the case of the Venom symbiote, Meridius also plans for these events to send the Venom symbiote on a journey which will eventually lead the Venom symbiote right to Meridius, to where from there, Meridius will shed his name, just like he has many other names, and at that point when him and the symbiote meet, for Meridius, that will be his "We Are Venom" moment, which ultimately is the end game of his plan. which is pretty nuts when you think of all the factors and all the people that are involved. But also, like in the last video in the comment section, a lot of you guys had mentioned that you believe that Meridius is actually Dylan, which is something that is possible, and to be completely transparent, I don't know. But the further and deeper we get into this story, it seems to trail further away from that idea, because really at this point, anyone can make a just as valid argument that the Venom symbiote is actually Meridius, with him evolving and trying to figure out who he is. And if it's the case of where over thousands of years it came to the realization that it didn't need a host and became Meridius, only to then craft this elaborate plan to go back in time and intentionally orchestrate his own evolution. And at this point, that idea also checks out. But again, like I said, who knows? Meridius could be anyone, but if by a long shot it turns out to be Venom, then he would have single-handedly redefined the phrase, "Focus on yourself, King." And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.